Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a text that completely reimagines human consciousness. We're talking about a total paradigm shift here. What if we aren't just biological machines, but incredibly complex, multi-channeled antennas constantly receiving data from the universe? We're going to explore a fascinating framework that maps our brainwaves, our senses, and our environment into one unified, harmonic spectrum. So, let's start with a massive question the source material poses. What if everything you learned in grade school about having strictly 5 senses was actually an incomplete blueprint? The text argues that we've essentially been handed a restricted, watered-down map of our own capabilities, designed to keep us inside a tiny little box. Today, we're breaking out of that box to see what we've supposedly been missing all along. To understand why this map is so restricted, the source points the finger directly at the 19th century Prussian schooling model, which, still forms the backbone of our modern institutions. It claims this model forces us into a reductionist matrix, basically teaching us that the brain is just an isolated machine and that we only have 5 strictly physical senses. And the text argues this wasn't an accident. It was an intentional design to churn out predictable, obedient assembly line workers, completely ignoring the reality that our brain is actually a powerful antenna with 7 complete sensory gateways. Let's look at one of those hidden gateways right now, interoception. Think of this as your body's internal dashboard, the deep awareness that monitors your gut feelings, your heartbeat, your breathing. The source posits a really wild theory here. It suggests that if institutions actually taught children to tune into this internal dashboard, those kids would immediately feel the artificial, physical stress of rigid classrooms, recognize the panic in their own bodies, and literally just walk out. And the text claims this systemic suppression is totally by design. The modern curriculum purposefully maximizes that chaotic, high-stress center of the brain, the weaking mid-beta waves. By keeping students trapped in a relentless, test-driven beta loop, the whole system acts like a digital jammer against our cooler, flowing frequencies. It actively suppresses our theta waves, which govern vivid, creative flow, and our gamma waves, which are the ones responsible for sudden epiphanies and superconscious insight. To truly grasp how this biological antenna works, the author outlines a complete spectrum of distinct brainwave frequencies. We've got everything from the deep, physical healing state of delta, all the way up to those hyperbinding gamma insights. The main takeaway here is that our brain never stays static. It's constantly shifting its internal dial, swapping out its instrumentation, depending on whether we are sleeping deeply, in a flow state of creation, or actively analyzing and stressing. Expanding on this, the source maps out 7 core senses that directly mirror the electromagnetic spectrum of a rainbow. It's like a giant puzzle coming together. The lower physical anchors, like that interoception we talked about, match the deeper red and yellow frequencies. Meanwhile, the higher frequency decoders, like visual photoreception, match the violet crown. The author uses this beautiful alignment to argue that we absolutely aren't biological machines. We're deeply connected, multidimensional receivers tuned right into the universe. Now, you might be wondering what happens if one of these physical antennas breaks. Well, the text explains a fascinating concept called cortical reallocation. Basically, the mind never stays in the dark. If a portal closes, consciousness just routes the data through a different lens. A perfect example of this is blindness. Through human echolocation, a blind person's brain can actually reroute auditory echoes directly into the visual cortex. They literally map out a geometric 3D mental image of their environment using sound. How incredible is that? There's a quote in the text that sums this up perfectly. The rainbow is the visible song of the invisible. As above, so below. This brilliantly illustrates the underlying premise of the entire text. We are the prism, and consciousness is the light. Recognizing that the exact same observer sits at the center, regardless of how the sensory data actually comes in, creates the perfect bridge for us to totally recontextualize neurodiversity. Looking through this new esoteric framework, the author argues that autism is absolutely not a deficit. Not at all. Instead, it's a hyper-acute recalibration, literally turning the sensory volume all the way up. The autistic brain utilizes a process called monotropism. So rather than skimming the surface with scattered, stressed-out beta waves, it pulls the entire conscious spotlight into one singular, incredibly deep theta-gamma laser channel, bypassing superficial filters to achieve profound hypercoherence. This perspective also completely reframes behaviors that society often labels as maladaptive. Think about tapping your foot when you're anxious. Well, when an autistic individual experiences chaotic spatial feedback, like a muted internal gyroscope, The text notes that behaviors like rocking or hand flapping are actually brilliant self-regulating biological hacks. Known as stimming, these movements manually force fluid through the inner ear, physically anchoring the body to gravity in an overwhelmingly loud environment. Okay, moving from our internal world out into society, the source makes a really surprising, almost sci-fi claim. You know the 2008 animated movie WALL-E? The text argues it's actually a literal blueprint hiding right in plain sight. It depicts an axiom reality designed by global elites to totally harvest human attention. In it, humans are confined to floating chairs, completely disconnected from the earth, meaning their root is atrophied, and they're pacified by a constant screen-fed dopamine loop. The control mechanism keeping us stuck in those floating chairs, according to the text, is a very real science called photic driving. The source posits that mass media, especially fast-paced content with those rapid-fire frame cuts and flashing colors, is engineered specifically to force the viewer's analytical mind into total exhaustion. Once the brain is overwhelmed, it drops into a passive, highly suggestible theta trance, a state where our consciousness can be easily programmed without us even putting up a fight. And it gets heavier. The source outlines how our physical consumption combines with this digital overload to create systemic chaos. We're talking artificial red dyes triggering high beta panic, massive spikes from refined sugars physically altering inner ear fluid and causing spatial disorientation, and the rapid fire flickering of artificial screen lights breaking our visual reflexes. The text claims this specific chemical and electromagnetic bombardment acts like a static jammer, throwing all 7 of our senses into a defensive, overloaded meltdown. So, how do we fix this? How does the text suggest we escape this static overload? Well, the author provides a fascinating alchemical master chart to help restore our organic blueprint. By using specific grounding earth tools like crystals and herbs, the source claims you can soothe that overstimulated nervous system. For example, if you're experiencing interoceptive panic, it recommends the dense grounding lattice of black tourmaline. Or if you're caught in a vestibular storm where your spatial awareness is spinning, ginger root is suggested to physically settle the fluid dynamics of the inner ear. It's all about natural recalibration. Ultimately, this entire explainer challenges us to realize that we aren't just passive receivers living in a chaotic world. We actually dictate the geometry of our own reality. By understanding our hidden senses and recognizing the frequencies we allow into our energetic fields, we are left with a pretty profound question to ponder. How will you consciously tune your own multi-channeled antenna moving forward? How will you step out of the floating chair today? Thanks so much for exploring this with us.